Doar nu acesta acolo. Da, da. Stai aici. Da. Ale voastre, nu știu, alu Laura este acolo? Laura este... Bună dimineața! Invit lumea să intre în sală și să închidem ușa chiar. Colegele să facă un pic de disciplină cu invitații. Al doilea anunț, ca la teatru. La al treilea sunăm clopoței. Mulțumim mult că sunteți cu noi pentru al nu știu câtele ani consecutiv la lansarea raportului anual EFOR, care în 2024 vine un pic mai târziu ca lună calendaristică decât eram obișnuit. Deci am intrat deja binișor. Are o microfonie undeva. Nu puteți ajuta cu microfonia asta? Care boxul? Păi, de boxe de acolo. Cred că e un alt... era un alt microfon pornit. Vă mulțumim, deci, că sunteți cu noi. Avem o temă importantă, făcută în parteneriat cu Romanian American Foundation. E un exercițiu de strategizare și pentru noi și pentru ei și sperăm să fie util pentru toată lumea. Pentru că ideea a fost să ne uităm ce se va întâmpla cu România în următorii 10 ani și orizontul lui 2035 e foarte important. E important pentru că el funcționează ca un milestone pe strategii europene și... I will repeat what I said in English, because I almost forgot that the linguistic regime today is in English, but we have simultaneous interpretations, so non-English speakers have the possibility to take a headset and follow. Actually, the idea to make such a report, and as I said, the topic is important for everyone. It should be for Romanian governments, especially in this hyper-electoral year, because what we do today is we look forward 10 years and try to see what are the challenges for Romania in the next 10 years. 2035 is an important milestone in Europe. It appears in many strategies as a milestone. There are many deadlines, there are many revisions of European programs, including funding programs, including enlargement, that are projected 10 years ahead. And we thought that in this complicated context, it would be good to reflect a bit on the strengths, but mostly weaknesses of the Romanian politics and governance system, and see what kind of risks we face, some of which are pretty obvious by now. And if we project them forward for 10 years, what can we say about Romania in 2035? So it's my pleasure now to invite here Roxana Vitan, our partner in this project, for the welcome address. And please, Roxana, tell us in what way you reflect on the 10 years ahead for the strategization of your organization, and then we will connect with what we do.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. I'm Roxana Vitan, President of Romanian American Foundation. Our foundation, it's an American foundation, independent Romanian American foundation that works exclusively for Romania. And we are working in cycles of 7 years, strategic cycles. It would be not a surprise since our work is in rural development, in education, in universities, and all the changes we are looking for are happening in times. Right now, we are preparing the next strategic cycle, which would be 2026-2032. So this is the context in which Expert Forum and the Romanian American Foundation's interests converge. Because we are in a solid and intense consultation process in order to, let's say, define our next strategy for the next 7-year cycle. So without further ado, I will let our colleagues and partners to tell us what they see in the future and hear your feedback on their crystal ball. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. There are 4 big chapters, how we organized our report, and what you find on your seats is a leaflet with 2 QR codes. If you scan one of them, you can even download the PDF version of this report. Please do that, because we will refer to some charts which you can find in the PDF version. And the other QR code is a link to the website of EFOR, and especially the section of donations and contributions, part of which go to assistance for Ukraine, which we have been doing for 2 years already, more than 2 years. So please scan that one and at least share it with some people who might be interested. And now I will enter immediately the first chapter, because I'm limited by the battery of my laptop. I don't see any sockets here. So we start big with the idea of convergence. Because this is where we are, this is a point from where we start. And some problems that I will refer to, some risks, are common to many new member states, and some are unique to Romania. But let's start from this optimistic point and become a little bit pessimistic later, that today, after 33 decades of post-communist transition, we can conclude that this has been an extraordinary successful historic experiment, almost unexpected, and with little historical precedence. New member states had fared incredibly well in terms of catching up or converging with Western Europe and the developed world. We have to say that the process has been, did not depend very much on the local elites. So now when we draw the line after 30 decades, we see that, you know, there were political ups and downs, rotations of elite, right, left, more reformist, more conservative in various post-communist countries. But at the end of the day, the end result where we are now, it's not so different. And this is explained by the fact that the governments and political elites in the new member states were mostly policy takers, so they didn't influence very much the decision in the European Union. They stayed very much into the strict
framework of policies defined by the, well, by the acquis communautaire, by and large. And this was a good thing. It was a very good reference framework. There was spectacular progress in the economy, and I will project some charts with the GDP per capita, which is probably the simplest and it's simplistic, but also indicative measure of convergence. There has also been progress in public services and the quality of life, not so much as economic indicators show, but still, compared to the year 1990, in all the countries. And actually, the more backward or distorted the situation was in one country, the more spectacular the progress was. And you can see even in a country like Romania, which had a very bad 80s, to put it this way. I mean, it's hard to imagine a situation more detrimental for growth than what we were left with in 89. Even on human development indicators, you see progress with a blip in the COVID crisis, but this is true for every country. The convergence looks like this, and I project even some neighboring countries. Well, this is Bulgaria, and this is a whole period of 3 decades of transition. This is GDP per capita as a fraction of the European average. So 100% is a EU average. So this shows how fast we close the gap. This is the Czech Republic. Of course, they started much higher, and this is no surprise. No, we know that from the 80s. Then we have, let me see what appears next, Poland, which has a profile, you know, it is the biggest country of the new member states, and a very steady and spectacular progress. We have also Romania, the yellow line, which more or less mimics Poland with the exception of the 90s, and we know why, because we had half a decade which was lost with vacillations and indecision at the beginning. But then it's the second biggest country after Poland, so it pretty much approximates the trajectory. And this is Slovakia. More or less the same thing, right? So there is convergence across the region, that's the message. And the more, you know, the lower a country started, like Romania and Bulgaria, which were the laggards in the communist world even, the faster the process of convergence was. For comparison, this is Republic of Moldova, which did not benefit, I mean, it's not their fault, they did not benefit from this extraordinary power of attraction and the benefits of getting closer to the European Union even before the accession as such, because the force of radiation is felt before accession. And again, there were elites which were more reformist at some points in time, and governments which were more backward-looking in Moldova. But in the end, that was true for the other countries as well. The trajectory is not explained by that. It's explained by context, mostly, by and large by context and by the you know, possibilities, actually, to benefit from getting closer and eventually into the European Union. By comparison, let's see the trajectory of 3 Mediterranean countries. And one is Greece, with some development and, of course, a big problem that started during the global economic crisis of 15 years ago now, right? That's no surprise. But Greece, more recently, has been nominated the country of the year by The Economist magazine last year, for 2023, for the speed of recovery in the last years and for, you know, the sensible reform programs and the macroeconomic stabilization. So it's a hopeful country, in spite of what you see on this trajectory. I will refer to it again a little bit more. This is Italy, and again, there's no surprise. It's been a discussion in Italy about this stagnation, historical stagnation for 3 decades, and a bit of erosion compared to the EU average in the GDP per capita, basically, but you can see this because it's transmitted in many social and economic systems. And you know, these are not irrelevant things, because at some point they influence the atmosphere in politics and the public conversation about public issues, you know. And there is a mode of I shouldn't say depression, but you know, pessimism, and there's a constant conversation. What can we do, you know, to resume growth, or to growth exists in absolute numbers in Greece, in Italy, and everywhere. It's just lower than the average of the EU, so you lose ground, basically. You diverge instead of converging. And this is the last country I want to project here is Portugal, a country that we don't pay much attention to usually, but we use it, if you will read the report, we use it as actually this is a case study that we take as a reference to compare Romania to, because it's interesting. It's not a big industrial country like Italy, and old member state. It has joined the EU relatively late. And there is an interesting discussion to be held about the example of Portugal and what we in Romania can learn from this example. Anyway, the consensus among Portuguese analysts is that, again, there is stagnation. There are questions, why is that? What can we do? I mean, what were the causes in the first place? Why, a number of years after accession, countries like Portugal, but others as well, actually hit the wall? Is this a common pattern? Is this a, you know, destiny that 10 or 15 years after accession, you actually encounter very serious problems, you get stuck into a middle income trap, and then the convergence stops? This is the case of Portugal, where most of the convergence, which is real, occurred before accession actually, and in the first year after that. The accession was in '86. For Portugal, right? And this is where I show more clearly. This is Portugal. The vertical red line is the year of accession, '86. The years are not very clear on the axis, but now you know the reference point. The blue line is GDP per capita as a fraction of EU average. So you see, actually a lot of convergence occurred in the '70s. After they signed in the 60s, when they signed a free trade agreement with what was then the common European area. It was before the EU. They grew fast, they got closer. Again, a few years after accession, that trend continued, but then they started to diverge. Like something gets clogged, you know, like something doesn't work anymore as well as before accession in the first years. So this is a common pattern for some countries. Not all member states have this trajectory, but some do. And looking at the blue columns are the average growth rate in GDP before accession in the 30 years before accession. The average was 3.4 per year. And after accession, from '86 to today, it was 1.9%. So almost half the growth rate. And again, it is relevant to reflect a little bit, why is that? And is this what we might experience in Romania? This is a very relevant question. So what happened in Portugal? A longer description exists in our report, and we quote some Portuguese analysts. But it's basically about becoming complacent. The fraction of investments in the public budget decreased. The fraction of social spending increased. The state increased. If I remember well, from an average of 25% of the GDP in aggregated budget revenues to over 45. A lot of special regimes for public employees or special categories of public employees were created. The labor market became very regulated, some say over-regulated. So you know, it was a normal and very democratic process of just piling up regulation after regulation after regulation, and then the pace of investment decreased. Portugal, like Romania, has over 95% of the registered companies as small enterprises or micro enterprises, a regime we also have, the micro enterprises with special taxation. Very low research and development investment in the private sector by these companies, which do not have scale, actually, to expand production. Most of them are dominant in sectors with low wages and low added value, like tourism or small manufacturing, traditions, you know. It's nice, but the potential for growth is not that big, actually. And there are a list of other factors which are listed there. In our report that should give people pause for thought in Romania. Because indeed, we look a bit more like Portugal than Italy or even Greece, actually. So, is this a possibility for us? What are the risks? So, moving forward and trying to, you know, to see if we really face such a risk in 10 years from now, we identified 7 risk factors for the process of convergence of Romania. And this is in the rest of my slides. Number 1, it's not probably very shocking for you, are the twin deficits, the budget deficit and the current account deficit. It is being discussed. I mean, it's not like we don't discuss these things in the public domain, but probably we discuss it so much and for so long that people got some sort of immunity to this discussion, that they don't realize how important it is and how unique Romania became among new member states. So we are now in the worst situation in the European Union. There's no one like us with these 2 deficits so big. And the most worrying is actually the current account deficit. So your budget deficit, you know what it is. We spend much more from the public purse than we get revenues. No surprise. Current account, we finance domestic consumption a lot through inflows of money from outside, whether borrowing or because people invest in Romania. And while the climate is good, that's fine. There are money coming in because people trust you and you can spend and eat and drink and have a nice life. What happens in bad times, if the bad times come, or people or investors start to lose trust in you, and it might happen, you know, then the party stops. And you end up with these things. What you see there are the twin deficits of Romania, and you see a very interesting and unexplained development. You see a big dip in both, so an increase in both deficits during the global economic crisis, and that's not unique to Romania. So it was 2008, 9, 10, and afterwards, right? It happened in all Europe. And then we recovered fast, like most new member states, which recovered faster from the crisis than the old member states of Western Europe. That's a pattern. But then something happened in 2015. And it was purely a political decision to actually open the purses, to lose control on public finance, to reduce taxation when the growth was won. So it was a very pro-cyclical movement before the electoral year 2016. So it was a deliberate decision by the government of that day, from which we never recovered until today. So you get this, and this we don't discuss enough because it is a big historical trend. It set the pace for Romania where we are today. We are 10 years after that and still did not recover, in spite of the fact that there were good years after the crisis. It was 15, 16, 17, 18. There were years with 19 with good economic growth. And still we ran increasingly high deficits, both. This creates big risks for Romania, and you cannot fix this in 1 or 2 years. You need a very determined government and political class and a very solid majority to start to redress the situation. It is a discussion to be held this year, which is an electoral year. And actually the logic of our report is to put problems on the table for the parties and the leaders to pick them up and give solutions. I'm not giving solutions. Our role is not to offer solutions, because there can be many solutions to problems, and that's the role of the parties, to offer packages of solutions and people to vote on solutions. But we need to have the right discussion and to put the right questions, and this is what we are doing now. So that's a big risk, the twin deficits. The second one is a growth model that we have in Romania, and this is related to what I said before, because we have growth. It's seen in the GDP. We are still converging quite fast, right? But unlike Poland, we grow very much based on domestic consumption. Not so much on production, on export, as we believe. There is some. I'm speaking in relative terms. But these inflows of money actually finance what we consume at home. And there's an increase in salaries, there's an increase in consumption, there is an increase in imports, which is, a direct consequence of the twin deficits that I shown before. This is in contrast with Poland, Czech Republic, even with Bulgaria. Nobody has such a bad structure like us. And when you look at numbers, this is a current account deficit in 2021 and 22. So 21 is blue, 22 is yellow. Bulgaria, very low. Czech Republic, not so big. Greece, they have bigger deficits, but they come with this historic experience of recovery from the shock of the crisis, and that I said they are on a good trend, so they are actually reducing deficits, and they got this prize from The Economist last year, in 23, which is not shown here on the chart. Poland, very low deficits, they produce and export. Portugal, which I've just mentioned, they have stagnation, but the structure, the macroeconomic aggregates are not so bad. And this is Romania, actually. And it is pretty unsustainable because both deficits are as big as is shown here, the current account deficit. We are in a big imbalance, actually, and we don't discuss enough about it. We think that, the music goes on, but we are on Titanic, actually. And if there's no iceberg, then it will be fine. But if in the next years we hit something, we are the least resilient among the new member states. This is a topic to be discussed this electoral year. Number 3, risks. Declining revenues from oil and gas. Otilia will speak on the energy chapter and she will give more details, but basically in the next 10 years, these revenues will decrease. This is important because today they make up about 10% of the total government revenues. If you put royalties, all sorts of taxation, there's a bit of arbitrariness how you compute, but this is a magnitude of the number. The problem is that people live with this illusion that we might become a petrostate. We speak about these offshore fields in the Black Sea that are going to be developed. They will enter production, and then we can relax. We will have money to pay pensions from these royalties, basically from gas extracted from the Black Sea, and that will be fine. And we've been discussing this for many years. I mean, the discussion started, and I think many people, not just in the political class, but in the public as well, have this impression. We are one of the few countries in the European Union with oil and gas, so what's the problem? Why are we not Saudi Arabia? I mean, why do we continue to tax people and companies? We should, abolish all taxes and live out of this. The problem is, it doesn't work right now, not to mention that such a rentier and extracting state living out of national resources, it bad omens for good governance. Statistically speaking, around the globe, the more you extract natural resources, the more likely it is that you are an authoritarian government with bad governance policy and with a low quality of life. So natural resources are a curse, as they speak as they call it in the. But that's an aside. What's going to happen in reality in the next 10 years is that we will have slowly declining production in oil, and there's no way to change that. The fields are old, and the production is declining, unless they come with an extraordinary new technology to, you know, to extract more oil from old fields, but it is unlikely. With gas, it's more complicated. What Ilya will explain it. Probably we will have an increase when we have these fields in exploitation in offshore. But then in 10 years from now, a lot of things will happen with gas. You don't know how the price is going to be. You don't know what the taxation regime is going to be. And gas is going to be increasingly penalized by policy in the European Union because we want to get off fossil fuels. So either there will be a super taxation, or it will be banned, it will be taken out of use in many industries, or in transportation, or in heating, especially in heating. So there will be restriction in using gas, actually. Precisely at the moment when we have these illusions that, you know, we will expand gas, put in every commune in Romania, and everybody will have gas, and we use PNRR to expand the pipes of gas, actually, we are just building an unsustainable structure. From the point of view of public revenues, this is no-go. So 10% of the government revenues will not disappear completely, but we cannot hope that it will increase. The fraction will decrease, actually. So it will feed into the previous problem. Less money, more budget deficits, if we don't do something with the sources of money in the budget. Number 4, the end of the European funds as we know them. Things will happen in the next 10 years which did not happen in the previous 10 or even 20. There are, you know, estimates or documents circulating inside the European Union about the next enlargement. In 10 years from now, we will most likely, I mean, the discussion is now to include 10 more countries, realistically probably 8. And I refer to Western Balkans, Moldova, and Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is a big thing, you know, when you speak about enlargement. But if we look at these 8 countries, so Europe 35, Europe in year 35 with 35 members, it's a nice coincidence. The increase in revenues from including the 8 countries, Western Balkans, Moldova, and Ukraine, is just 2.5%. So this is how much they add, because there are poorer countries, and Ukraine is destroyed by war. Population increase is of almost 15%, and the budget needs on the current rules are 21% more. So there's a discrepancy about what they bring to the table and what they need to consume. Of course, rules have to be changed, and they will be changed. There is discussion about that. Again, we have the last chapter will be presented by Otilia. We will discuss in what way the rules of financing, the regulations about funds, will be changed. But and first, where we are as Romania, since accession until the day we speak, this is what we got from the European Union, and I include here cohesion, PNRR, and agricultural funds. So 94 or maybe 92, this is the money we actually got, not the total envelope of allocation. This is what entered Romania, 94, and this is what we contributed, roughly 30 billion. So the net, what we gained from the European Union is 65, let's say, 65 billion. This is what we got since accession. This is a nice sum, and it represents about 2% of the GDP for the whole period. So our spectacular growth is explained, 2% of it, it's mostly the influx of EU funds, which practically, and it could have been more if we had a better rate of absorption. But this is based on the real rate of absorption. So this is what really happened in reality. What's going to happen? Depending on how rules will be changed, we can expect that this contribution to the GDP will be half or less. Now, we interviewed economists, development experts, Romania International, and now the opinion is split. Some people will say we will remain, as Romania, we will remain net beneficiaries of funds. Some people will say however, that we might become net contributors. I don't even want to think what will be the political effects in Romania of becoming net contributors to the EU budget in the current political atmosphere, political alignment, quality of political class, electoral dynamics. It's unthinkable. It is a possibility because PNRR will end, the recovery plan, you're right, 26, no way to expand it. And it's not big, but it's a good chunk, about 5 billion so far. No? Out of the 65, 5 billion were PNRR in the last years. 2 or even 3 regions, not 2 regions of Romania will get out of the, will get through the ceiling of the cohesion rules, which is 75% of the average. So this is Bucharest, Ilfov, Northwest, and probably West. They will not be eligible anymore for cohesion funds. We are not used to thinking in these terms, to get out of, to be above average somehow, but it will happen. And there will be a big restructuring of the common agricultural policy. It cannot be to have Ukraine, especially, but Moldova and the others inside under the current rules, because by some estimates, they will absorb about 75% of the money, and of course this will be politically unacceptable in Europe. So rules will change about common agricultural policy, or CEP will be completely abolished. It has been discussed before. I remember when Cioloș was commissioner. Of course, the political discussion is very difficult in Europe, and farmers are probably the strongest lobby in the European Union by far. Representing 4% of the population, they get 1/3 of the budget. So there's, and it's a very entrenched vested interest group because it's very old. CEP is an old policy in Europe, and it kicks in many countries in many ways. And on top of that, there has to be a reconstruction facility for Ukraine, separate from the rest of the cohesion, CEP, whatever will happen. Now, the estimates from last year, what is the size, and that's from last year without the distractions of this year, it's about the size of the CEP, which means about $30 billion. That's the estimate of the World Bank, but it dates from last summer. So we have to see what the ticket will be eventually when the war stops. And for the remaining money, so when all the cuts are operated, CEP abolished, you create a facility for Ukraine, the rest, for the member states, the logic of the project financing will change. It will be less allocation by territory, by population, by per capita or whatever, like in agriculture. It will be more competitive based, targeting research and development, or at least innovation somehow. Big pan-European projects, so not so much national projects, but projects which connect somehow Europe or involve more than one country, or projects which are national but conditional on reforms, like it was in PNRR in the recovery. Now, comparatively speaking, our government, whatever Bulgarian government or the other governments in new member states, but especially Romanian government, was not very successful precisely on such projects. We are good when we have our own allocation, it's very vertical, put in a silo, and even then we don't absorb all the money. But when you are put in a pan-European competitive logic, or you need to cooperate across borders to develop a big project, even in infrastructure, not to speak about investment in R&D, we know what happened with this reactor in Măgurele. And so these are actually bad indicators for us, or warning signs for us. We will not be able to compete even for the remaining envelope of EU funds, which will be anyway smaller. We need to think about this. And if we become a net contributor, as I said, that's a bit unthinkable for the conversation in Romania. Number 5, the demographic shock, which is special in Romania because the whole continent is aging. That's nothing new. We know that we will have problems with paying pensions 10 years from now. There are countries where population is older, but in general, that's a trend everywhere. However, Romania is absolutely unique in one sense. Something happened in '66 when Ceausescu regime in October '66 abolished abortions by decree, overnight, without any discussion or preparation. And what you see there, it's the birth rate. It was a spike overnight for 2 or 3 years, 66, 7, 8, which created a generation twice the size of the previous year. It rarely happens, actually, it never happens in Europe. It's a unique social experiment in Romania. And the blue line is for comparison France. So how you had the demographic transition in a normal West European countries. There was a demographic transition. So after the Second World War, in every country, the birth rate decreased. You know, we speak about these things. But nowhere you have such a phenomenon like in Romania, where they were trying, actually, the regime was trying to fight the collapse of the birth rate before 66, as you see, for many reasons, but primarily, you know, the bad quality of life under communism. It was decreasing, so people were having less and less kids, and they tried to do this, you know, through police measures, because this is what it was, basically, and intense repression. Banning contraception, everything. It was not just a ban of abortion, and Romanians know very well what that means. The point is, it lasted for 2 or 3 years, and then the effect got resorbed. So the birth rate continued to collapse after that, because people adapted in many ways. I don't want to enter details now. So it didn't actually work for demography, but what created was a generation which we call decreței, so the kids of the decret of Ceausescu. I'm one of them. I was born in late 66. And this generation is twice as high, as large as the generation before, in just a space of 1 year. And it lasts for 2 or 3 years, and you see there, in the skewed demographic pyramid of Romania. This is a pyramid calculated in 2014. So now they are not 45, 46 years of age, as is shown there. Now they are 10 years older. The point is, they will start to retire in 31, 32. And there's no way to change that. So, starting with 31, you will have retirements double in size than the year before, and then continuing for a number of years, because if you see, even the other generation are still bigger. All these people will retire. We already have problems in the public pension system, Pillar 1, as we call it, so the pay-as-you-go system. And this is unbearable, actually. This is the end of it. Absolutely no discussion about it. This is taboo subject for politicians, because there's no solution to it, basically. So then you don't touch it, you know, as a politician, because anyway, it's beyond the 4-year horizon of elections. So who cares about 31, 32, 33? But in 35, the effects will be there. And we don't have a solution for Pillar 1, for the pay-as-you-go pension system. This is a very big risk. This is a very big risk. And we don't have any idea how to deal with it. We don't. We just put it on the table, and they will deal with it, I'm sure. Migration political nexus. Now, at least when you put the numbers on charts, it looks like that's one area in which we don't have a particular problem in Romania. There's not much migration in Romania compared to Europe, to some countries of Europe. These are the legal residents in Romania, and what I show there is that EU and CE residents are about 1/3 of the total, but the total is not big. It's 170,000 people, which is nothing for the population of Romania. These are the legal residents that we have now. And these are the working permits. Mostly, of course, for third country nationals that we issue in Romania. This is a cumulative number. So this is the number of people that we have now, Romania, working on working permits, about 110,000 people. Again, not much, not very much. Of course, I don't show, there's no, I didn't project. Laura will come with details, and you will see the time series, and it has been increasing lately because, and we can see it around, that we have more and more people from the global south, so to speak, who are working in low-paid professions. But it's not a phenomenon yet. That's my point here, and this is a number of asylum seekers. Okay, so this is a situation. It looks like we can be confident that there will be no problems here. And still, 10 years from now, the labor market will be different. And the question is, to what extent these people who actually we let them in, following very strict profiling, you see them, that we prefer to have young male people and probably some women, preferably from non-Muslim countries, you know. There is no written rule somewhere, but you see from the result that a screening is applied, a very strict one. Absolute numbers are not a problem, but what we've seen from Western countries is that it's not always absolute numbers that matter. It's relative numbers and the speed of increase in certain communities of concentrated numbers of foreign workers coming in. And that's the inflection point when local communities start to feel threatened, with a reason, but most likely without any reason, any objective reason, they still can create political problems. And this is where you start to feel it in the political conversation. Right now, we are still under this Gastarbeiter illusion that we get these guys, we let them in, and when we are finished with them, we put them on the plane, send them back, everything is solved. No? Does it work this way? It doesn't. In the medium and long run, we learn from Western countries that it doesn't work this way. And there is a point, an inflection point, when they start to form families, they start to form small communities, and they start to claim rights here. And that's when the political conversation will start, one that we don't have right now. We are under these illusions, like some Western countries decades ago, you know, we let them in, they work, and when they cannot work anymore, we, pack them and go, no? Well, they don't. They will form families, communities, mixed families, they will have kids in school, and we will need to be able to manage this situation. There's a the new Schengen, the reformed Schengen will add to the burden because we need to share the burden of hosting refugees, right? So we will need to take more of these people who are refugees, not Gastarbeiters, right? They will be here for a long time, and the pressure in the new Schengen to share the burden with Greece, with Italy, right, the countries of first line will be massive, and there is an argument to share the burden. The problem will be there for us because, not objectively, but because we are not politically prepared, and we don't have this conversation at all right now. And my question is, if our authorities will be able to manage this situation, given the current methods they instinctively appeal to, which is to put everything in the Supreme Council for Defense, actually, and to create from everything a security problem, and discuss it mostly in military and intelligence circles, largely behind closed doors and without much consultation. Whenever is a crisis, this is a tendency, what we do in Romania. And the problem is, are we able, whenever we have such a problem which is political and civilian in nature, are we going to invent a Dr. Arafat and Colonel Gheorghiță every time we have a problem to put them in charge? And yes, we can, because we have an endless supply of Colonel Gheorghiță. That's no problem. The problem is, can they fix problems? Did it work last time with the vaccines? Can we use the security force apparatus every time to, every time we have a problem, let's put someone in charge, hide it from the public, from the parties, and solve it in these circles? A question. And my last point, which is a bit related to this one, is a decline in governance and quality and efficiency, not because there is clientelism and theft of public resources, that too, it can be, and we haven't solved it. But even without of that, there are, things happen in democracy sometimes that over time, over elections, without, without abolishing the democratic institutions and mechanisms in elections, coalitions of rent-seeking groups proliferate, Through decisions, they carve a niche from themselves. First one, then the second, then the third. And after years, a little bit what happened in Portugal. In other countries, they actually capture the democratic mechanisms to create a preferential regimes from themselves, In public decision theory, these groups are called Olson groups from the Nobel Prize economist Mansur Olson. He theorized these things. So it's not about theft, it's not about coup d'etat by the military, it's purely by the democratic mechanism. Some groups become, more skilled than others to exploit the decision making and to get preferential access to public resources. There's cartelization of politics, so reduced level of competition in politics because big parties make coalitions actually, and the space for real decision making and consultation is reduced. And these groups are also called extraction groups. They can be the Siloviki of Romania, which is a security military apparatus creating, inserting themselves in politics, in business, like they are doing. I mean, we're talking about real things now. There's recently, this decision to put Serei in charge of, to work with ANAF for the database of taxation. And, okay, so they are all over the place. But not necessarily Siloviki. It can be special pensioners, that we have this problem in Romania, big problem, big unsolved problem. And there's an estimate that in a few years, the special pensions will make up about 1.5% of the GDP. That's from the National Bank. Somebody from the National Bank sent that. Or it can be farmers under the Common Agricultural Policy or other groups, groups that have a preferential position and are able to extract more than average from public resources. The effects are counter-selection in politics and government, and we see it. I mean, what I'm saying, I think there's consensus that we already have these effects. We see them. Suboptimal allocation of public resources. Then you have passive, cynical citizenry because they see what happens, and people start to play just zero-sum games. I gain at your expense. There's no, win-win philosophy in the minds of the people. They become cynical. They realize that elections don't change much because parties alternate. I mean, elections are okay. Nobody steals elections. Parties are okay. Some lose. Sometimes it's even suspense in elections and you have a winner. But people feel that the decision actually, that, that the state within the state is not touched. And the space for change is narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. I mean, we changed something with elections, but not much. The Olson groups remain there. Distrust in public institutions, distrust within actors in society, and we already come with a history of that. And the question is, with such a state and society, which we are seeing now, there is a trend in this direction, how can we implement the sophisticated strategies, a new growth model, changing things? How can we take big decisions? And how can we play a role in shaping the new Europe, which is a subject that my colleague will speak about, Otilia, in the last chapter. I will end here, and Laura will come now with details about migration, and then Otilia will...
Thank you very much, Sorin. Just briefly, I will give you some data on migration, because there's a lot of discussion about the impact of migrants on EU member states, and I think it's useful from time to time to see the data, to see how many migrants we actually have, if the technology is going to be with us. Voila. So this is where we are, right? The first one is Luxembourg, which has a very small population itself, right? And you see lots of EU citizens there, not really third country nationals. This is how the migration happens from outside the EU. This is the top chart, and inside the EU, with the special year of the pandemic. And then these are projections by Eurostat. They compare 2022 with 2100. Only 12 countries in the EU are going to have a positive net difference for the population with migrants included. So actually only 12 countries are going to have a higher population than they have today. Because the reality is that even with the migrants, we don't have more than 2.1 kids per family. This is how the decline of population will happen in Romania, and don't be overjoyed by the yellow spots, because some of those yellow spots already lost population. So the decline in population is going to affect differently rural and urban areas in Europe, with rural losing more than urban areas are losing. And the declining population is going to affect countries differently, as we saw in the previous slide. This is the data for Romania. Again, it's an estimate, but it's as good as it gets. Here we show the visa requests for Romania. This is historical data, so these are facts. We see a slight increase from 2020 to 2022. And then these are the work permits. We see an important increase, but still the numbers are quite low. So we may be at the beginning of a curve, but still the numbers are insignificant, I would say. This is the asylum requests, and this is how the data on foreigners in Romania look like. And this is who the foreigners are, right? So, of course, we have Moldova, top, then Turkey and China. And the data, again, is as good as it gets. You see a lot of empty spots, because this is how official data looks like. And I think this is the #1 lesson that we learn, that data gathering and data usage for policy formulation is quite poor in Romania. And unless we learn how to make better use of data and how to collect better data, we're going to be crippled in our capacity to formulate public policies. Sorin touched upon this a little bit. I just want to underline, according to OECD analysis, they publish a regular report called Settling In. Migrants that come for labor are then followed by their families. So this is going to happen to Romania too. Romania is in no way different than other countries. So we need to start thinking about solutions having to do with access to education for these people. Okay, for Moldova, maybe the language issue is not a big issue, but for the rest of the countries that are represented in the migration charts in Romania, language is a problem. And we've seen how big of a problem was with the Ukrainian war crisis, right? The Romanian education system was completely unable to actually offer options for migrants, for refugees. Many of the options came from, non-statal actors, let's call them like that, including the community of Ukrainians that came to Romania. The same is true for health access. Romania has a very simple way to deal with these things. We adopt a piece of legislation that has a very general and generous line in it saying you have access to everything. But in reality, how does access happen? And this is a struggle also in OECD countries, not just in countries like Romania, who are still outside the OECD. Giving real access to health is a big problem. And again, learning from the Ukrainian refugee crisis and our experiences with that, that line in the emergency ordinance of the government did not translate well at all in real life, because doctors could not treat Ukrainian patients, and I'm not talking here about the emergency services, but regular health services were very difficult to be accessed. And we have long stories and many stories of trying to help Ukrainian refugees access those. So I think there's a lot of learning that can happen from those experiences. Then social benefits. Again, if you look at the Ukrainian crisis, we're not very good in dealing with that. There's a lot of regulation happening at local level, and there is an expectation that, for example, for kids with special needs, everybody's treated the same and you'll receive the same benefits irrespective of whether you're a national or a non-national. Well, actually, if you look into the local regulations, you see that cities treat these issues very differently, and that generates a lot of disparity for those that are directly impacted. Access to housing, we don't even go there yet. But this is something to think about, because if you look at the OECD analysis, this is one of the big issues, giving migrants access to proper housing. And then I would add one more element from my field of expertise, which is rule of law and policing. I think the capacity of the state to police these communities needs to improve significantly. And I'm not sure we're there yet. We first need to know who these communities are. And I think in Expert Forum we have worked a little bit on the Chinese communities. There are some studies that have been published. But assuming that all migrants are the same is actually, and Ukraine, is actually a big mistake. So we leave you with this, with a profile of migrants, because I think it is very important to know who are we talking about, not just about numbers, but also about countries of provenance, to understand how that will impact on the way Romanians are going to interact with, and bear in mind, Romania is not traditionally a very diverse country. We tend to think that we are very welcoming, right? Provided that you're blonde with blue eyes when you're coming. So I think we'll see some shocks in the population of Romania in terms of acceptance of those that are coming towards us. And I finish by saying that I think Romania has become a country of destination for labor migration. I think we are at the beginning of the trend. Of course, we're here looking in the crystal ball, so I take this also myself. I think we are at the beginning of the curve. And I think in terms of handling diversity, we're not very prepared as a society, but also at political level. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Now I'm going to make a presentation which is, it has a very interesting title and not a decent title for any expert, I would say. But the explanation is the fact that I'm going to go quite quickly through 3 of the chapters of the report that you have on the QR code. So these 3 chapters are, first one is related to the technology and the evolutions that we are going to see in the labor market, and of course the risks. Then the second chapter would be about energy and what are the big trends at the European Union and where we are and what are the risks for us. And the last one is going to look at the institutional changes and reforms which are bound to happen within the next 10 years in the European Union and how we can contribute or be impacted by this. I think, it's okay. I think the approach has been a little bit different between me and Sorin, because he wants to throw the questions just to show what are the risks that accompany us and let the policymakers to think through what are the solutions to these problems. In these chapters, we are going to approach it a little bit differently. And this is caused by the fact that in every single one of these areas, there are a lot of different reports, very different modeling exercises on migration, on energy future prospects, on various technologies and uptake of technologies, on what the labor markets are going to look like, what is going to be the demographic change, and how all these are going to come up together. And of course, there are a lot of unknowns, and if you compare any two studies which are done on the same subject, the results that they have by 2035 or by 2050, regardless of how sophisticated the models are completely different. So I try to put myself in the shoes of a policymaker who gets all these reports and asks himself, so what am I going to do with this? How am I supposed to make some decisions which are going to impact how the country is going to look in 10 years? Because the decisions that we make today are going to impact, particularly on technology, energy, and institutional reform, how the future will look like. And of course, all of us were optimists, and we didn't consider the fact that we might have war, or the EU might not exist in 10 years. So all the forecasts that we make are actually quite restrained. First, I'm going to look a little bit at the technology and the labor market. And we discussed a little bit in the report of what are the key technologies that are being discussed by all the experts around Europe and around the world as being the ones which have the highest chance to make a big revolutionary change in how the world is going to look in 10 or 15 years. These are mostly related to digitalization and artificial intelligence, but there are also things which happen, let's say, physical outputs. For example, the 3D printing. I'm not going to discuss very much about this. I'm going to look at what are the risks for Romania. So if you look at all the forecasts and the recommendations of the reports, all of them say that the key challenge is to make sure that your labor force is adapted to whatever may be. And education, for example, is not necessarily going to be very much specialized. The very basic foundation of literacy and numerical literacy are going to be very important. Romania fares systematically worse than European countries. And we also see that there is a correlation between the level of education and the risk of remaining poor or be socially excluded. This is the graph that is on the right. Now, Romania is, we have a good internet speed. And some of the indicators that we have in terms of digitalizations look quite good. But the question is, to what extent do companies really take up digitalization? And here we have, our figures are not so good. For example, most of the companies which are digitalized are using it not for very sophisticated things, but mostly for the basic repetitive operations. And this is something that shows us that we might have, if things start evolving really quickly, we might have a lag there. A different problem is the fact that for some reason we have big problems about inequality. Inequality has actually several layers, and we looked also at the difference between rural and urban in the report. And we saw that if you compare the development regions, the NUTS 2, you see that actually the inequalities have increased in the past 20 years. Which is, so for example, if the ratio of GDP per capita between the richest and the richest being Bucharest, Ilfov, and the poorest region, which was northeast Moldova, was about 3 times, now it's 4 times. So the situation is actually worsening. We have also a big problem with demography, with several waves that have affected the structure of the human capital that we have remaining in the country. We looked a little bit at the waves of migration, and we saw, for example, that in recent years, so if until 2011, there were larger waves of people who were low-skilled and living from depressed areas to mostly low-skilled jobs abroad. Now we see in the past 10 years that there is an increase of high-skilled people who are also leaving, mostly from the medical sector and the IT sector. And these are precisely the high-tech areas in which we are going to need particularly qualified people. And this, for example, when you look at the medical sector, we know that this will pile up on the demography, meaning that in 10 years we are going to have more old people who are going to need more medical services. All these things add up to a pretty gloomy picture if we look at the risks that are for the future. Okay. And the question is, how is the let's say the need for skills going to look like in the labor market? For this we found some interesting forecasts. For example, there is a Center for Vocational Education which pertains to the European Commission, and they have looked at all the countries and in the EU, and this is what we are going to face in 2035. So for example, if you look in the first graph, you see that we are going to have a larger share of medium and low qualified people than the average in the EU. So that means the type of businesses that we would be able to attract are more likely to be the low-skilled ones and not the high-intense technologized versions. And the second graph is an expectation of what kind of demand might be for various types of professions. The highest in demand, where there will be with the highest difficulty in finding adequate people, it's going to be the professionals and the highly skilled labor. And this is something that apparently, looking at the trends that we see and might expect in the future also for the in-migration, this is not an area where we can compensate easily with migration, because the types of migrants that have come and started to come recently, like from Sri Lanka or Nepal or Vietnam in the past 2 years, they are mostly for low-skilled jobs. So it's a question whether we are going to be able to attract high-skilled people and whether we are going to be able to retain high-skilled people after we educate, or if students are going to go for education like it happens today abroad. I'm going to jump now to the sector of energy, where I feel a little bit more comfortable. The question of energy is actually quite interesting in the European Union, because everybody expects a sort of outright revolution, something comparable with the invention of the motor car or of the railway, which really changed everything in terms of infrastructure and how things move. We have certain challenges. So first of all, we know that we have to do something about the climate, and that would imply that we are going to have net zero emissions by 2050. That will change a lot of things, not only in general in how we produce and how we consume energy. So, for example, there are sectors in energy which can be much more easily decarbonized than others, and electrification is one of them. So we expect to shift a lot from the current energy primary consumption from other fuels like gas or oil or coal to electricity. Electricity means will jump from 25% today to something like 75%. Here there is a remarkable, let's say, convergence of opinions of various experts. Now, we have big problems in the sense that, first of all, if you look at the map, you see that there are big parts where there are huge resources for renewables, whereas the consumption is somewhere else. How do we make them match? Then we have the problem that if we make a decision today to invest in a power line or in a gas pipeline or in a power plant, that plant or that asset is going to stay with us from 30 to 60 years. Or a building. So whatever decision we make today, it will be path dependent. And this is why we have to make sure that we don't mess it up big time now. Then we have a problem about climate priority. So yes, we know that we are going to be net zero by 2050, but climate change happens now, and it's much more important to front load the measures that are reducing emissions. That means if you save 1 ton of CO2 today, that would mean 10 tons of CO2 by 2035. Unlike if you save 1 ton of CO2 in 2035 alone. But that actually clashes frontally with the desire and the short-term vision of politicians which think in political cycles and would like to postpone the difficult decisions for later. Then we have a problem of governance. Yes, we have a common energy policy in the entire EU, but we have 27 national energy policies. We have 27 energy regulators. We have 27 transport operators of gas and electricity grids. And whatever pan-European institution we have come up with are actually associations of national interests. So if you look at the so-called continental grid of electricity, it's actually an association of 20 national grids. And the interests of national players are sometimes quite different than the interests of Europe as a whole. For example, one of the biggest challenges for increasing interconnectivity is the fact that every single transport operator wants to maximize its revenue, and it might impose charges for the energy crossing the border. How does that fare well with the European policy? We also have to think quite differently than what we did until now in terms of new threats. So, for example, if we look at what happens in Ukraine, you see that there is a big risk if you are under a terrorist attack, for example, not necessarily war, that if your energy system relies on big units and a few lines, if there is something happening on that big unit or big line, then you are going to have a blackout in the country. So these are things that we haven't considered so far, but we should take into account because, for example, there are going to be climate risks. Yes, what happens? We are relying on hydro energy. What happens if there is a big drought? Or what happens if the wind doesn't blow, as it did in 2021? And another layer of complexity is complexity itself. So, for example, if you're trying to imagine a system which has a lot of digitalization around it, and a lot of need to coordinate multiple players and multiple points of consumption, every single layer of complexity adds to the risk. Because if one link in the chain fails, then the whole chain fails. Last but not least, there is going to be a big problem of social justice, this energy transformation. And we saw that already in the past. For example, with high energy, during the energy crisis, the highest impact was suffered by the poorest strata of the society, for whom energy bills are an important part of total available income. But also, if you look at what's happening in the future, when we are going to restructure certain industries, it's precisely the extractive areas of fossil fuels which are going to be impacted by unemployment and by the effects of climate change, for example, Southern Europe. So all these things have to be taken into account. The European Union has done already quite a good job on some of this, but there is still much to be done. I'm not going to go into all the technical details, which are actually quite speculative in the report, but I'm going to say that there are two big visions that you see in every forecast that relates to energy. One of them is, are we going to have a centralized system in which we are going to use the big areas like Northern Europe for offshore wind, which is high enough to cover 30 times the consumption of Romania, just the potential that is being built now in the North Sea for offshore wind. And are we going to somehow get all the energy there and transmit it all across Europe? That's one version. The second version is is much more decentralized. Yes, consumption is at cities, and it's going to be more and more urban. So how about trying to produce electricity at the local level? And these two different visions are actually kind of conflicting with each other, but both of them are being sought at the same time in the European policy, which I think actually it's good, because we don't know which one of them is going to be better. So the big challenge for all of us is to find a system that has both the capacity to manage centralized across Europe, but to have local resilience just in case there is an attack or a major climate problem to areas in which the energy source is concentrated. In practice, this happens already. So, for example, if you look at what's happening with the offshore wind development in the North Sea, you're going to see that there are 11 countries actually already which are starting to develop in common a separate system from the transmission grids today, which is actually going to cover most of the energy needs of Northern Europe, and it's going to help balance regionally, export regionally, so it's going to be like a market itself. And then we have the second part of the graph is actually some pictures that I stole from the presentation of Ukraine's brilliant CEO of Ukrenergo, and who is looking at how the energy system in Ukraine is going to be restructured after the war. And there you had two big problems. One was the destruction of the transmission infrastructure. Now there is a problem of destruction of big power plants. Yes, of course we are not. Let's say we are not in the same situation, but it's a very interesting case to look at for Europe as well, because you got rid of path dependency. So you have to build something from scratch. How are you going to build it? This is something that we should also pay attention to, inside Europe to see what are the technologies that would work better in this given context. And we also have a stake ourselves to make sure Ukraine wins and to make sure that we make these investments in Ukraine after the war stops. So probably the solution is going to be something that integrates both. To have most of the energy produced where the resource is cheap, but also a backup solution, maybe with a lot of redundancy at local level. Here, I just wanted to say that despite these very interesting discussions that happened at the European level, we are going in precisely the opposite direction, unfortunately. And we are actually, so first of all, if you look at the Romanian energy system, you see that it has been built before 1990 for a completely different type of consumption. So households were consuming only 5% of electricity in the entire country, and 95% was in huge industry, which died. This whole system is designed for that kind of consumption. And we have to shift rapidly from that to something that is going to respond to the demands of 2035, 2050. Instead of that, we are actually, so if you look at the picture in the lower corner, you see that map of planned development of Transelectrica's power lines, which are actually, I think I've used this map for the past 20 years. It's the same. It hasn't changed. It hasn't taken into account the shifts in demand, and the projects are simply being delayed and not adjusted with the new realities. And on gas, this is actually where we go completely in the different direction than the entire EU, because the EU has, I mean, there is a strategy, the REPowerEU, which says by 2030, you have to halve the consumption of gas in Europe. And we are expanding gas grids. We are going to build gas power plants, which actually our expectations, and actually this is what the officials are saying, is that Romania's consumption is going to be double in 2030. So are we going in the right direction? I don't think so. So to summarize this, I would say that the biggest challenge for Romania in the next 10 years is the fact that we have fixed ideas and low competencies to rethink a little bit where we want to go. Yes. Yes, so actually we wrote the chapters, very independently, and then we realized that we have the same views. Yes. Yes, great minds think alike. Now I'm going to present a little bit about the big discussion that happens now on the restructuring of the entire European Union. Because this is something that is going to affect us directly, and the question is, are we going to contribute to it, or are we going to be hit by it? So in the past 2 years, particularly after, we were very complacent for a long time inside the European Union. Things were working, more or less. I mean, even during the pandemic, the European Union managed to put its resources together to find a common solution, even in the existing institutional structure. But once the war in Ukraine started full scale, there was a complete rethinking of the types of dangers that we are confronted with. And we had to consider also the fact that the European Union might expand, and that we have some institutional problems which have given us a big pain in the past and are going to be much more substantial if the European Union enlarges. So we also have to deal finally with the problems that happen from inside the EU. Yes, you know the long discussions about the breaches of rule of law in Hungary or Poland and now Slovakia. And there is a question that some of the EU member states might actually not be democracies anymore. We also have problems about how the decisions are being made inside the European Union. You have in the report you are going to see a lot of details about all of this, but I would only want to say that 20% of the decisions that are taken by the EU are on very big things and they require unanimity. The question is unanimity workable today with 27 countries? Is it going to be workable with 35 or not? So there is a need to streamline the decision-making process. And we also need to make sure that deviations from the core values, which are shared by the European Union or on which it was built at the very beginning, are not being deviated from. So there have been a lot of ideas. The first ones, I think, happened with the idea of Macron with the European political community. Then last year there was a joint task force supported by France and Germany, which is called the Group of 12, which looked in detail on how the European Union should be reformed. In the expectation also that we are going to expand and the European Union has to be also prepared for expansion. It's not just a challenge for the countries that are going to enter the EU, but for the EU as well. I invite you to read that report because it's actually incredibly interesting and it's in a very easy to understand language for everybody. But I think what is very important is the fact that they recommend that, and this is something that we've heard quite recently quite a lot, that we should move for the practice of unanimity to qualified majority voting. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about this. It's a very big temptation to look for shortcuts in avoiding cases like Hungary blocking accession of Ukraine, for example, or help for Ukraine. And the expression qualified majority voting has been used like a silver bullet, but it's actually not so very simple in practice. There are some decisions in which there are some, let's say the EU treaties, give you some possibilities to shift some of the decisions to this qualified majority voting without amending the treaty. But the most critical ones require a change in the treaty. And that treaty is going to require unanimity, and that treaty is going to require also referenda in all of the member states. So this is actually not a very, it's not a silver bullet. Another recommendation in the report is the fact that some countries might decide to integrate with each other more than others. So they might decide in common that these are some policies in which we are going to invest more and we are more interested in. Here we are going to go for qualified majority voting among ourselves, and other countries are can join or not. They have this option, let's say the opt-out. And this is actually something that has been used so far inside the EU. For example, there are countries which are not members of Schengen, there are countries which are not members of the Eurozone. So these, and some of them, for example, UK before exiting, it was an option expressed by the country itself. So there is a risk that if you practice too much this option of opt-out, then you get a pick and choose, cherry picking of the type of policies that you want to adopt and be closer integrated. Of course, the first opt-out that everybody would jump to, particularly the problematic countries, would be on the core values. Yes, liberties and the rule of law. And this is precisely what it shouldn't happen. Now, the question is how this principle of opt-out and selection of policies in which countries are going to want more integration compared to less, how is it going to affect the structure of the EU? And the Franco-German report says that maybe we are going to have 4 concentric levels of Europeanization in general, with 2 circles in the middle, which are going to be core EU and EU, and then some looser associations with associate members and broader Europe or whatever. Yes, let's say the broader world. This option has some advantages, but it also has some disadvantages, and I think Romania risks seriously of finding itself in the second circle. And it might actually generate a sense of first-class, second-class Europe, and also a feeling of complacency. Why should we expand Europe with new member states when we can keep associate members and things are easy this way? Maybe a better option would be the incredible mess that Europe is today, but which works quite well. Yes, so we have various forms of cooperation on various thematic areas, from the 3 Seas initiative to Visegrad Group to Eastern Partnership as a relation with countries in the Eastern neighborhood, Guam, CEFTA, the Eurozone inside the EU, the EU Customs Unit, the European Economic Area, and all of these allow for a lot of flexibility, but without introducing these first-class, second-class countries. What? Okay. Now, the question is how, or one of the areas in which we can imagine a stronger Europe is the cooperation which, let's say, binds a little bit better the countries with each other in different ways than we are inside the formal institutions of the European Union. So, for example, there is this policy of macro-regions which allow countries to work very well together at local level. This is very important on projects that are mutually important. This is financed with EU money. And there is the second option, which is the pure cross-border cooperation, which again is formed by these little cooperation projects, which bring together, very importantly, local administrations, local stakeholders, citizens, and the EU. And this is, I think, maybe the regional policy is probably going to shift a little bit towards this, because it also brings Europe close to the grassroots. Particularly when there is a big challenge of disinformation and strong anti-EU manipulation, it's very important to bring these stakeholders in direct contact with the EU without going through the national governments. And one of the recommendations that we have, actually, looking at the experience of what happened with Hungary and Poland and possibly Romania as well, I think it's very important for the European Commission, instead of, how do we deal with Hungary? We can take it out of the unanimity, we can take unanimity out. But maybe we shouldn't let Hungary slip so far from democracy in the first place. And how do we, because today it's Hungary, tomorrow there might be 5 countries or 10 countries, and then even with a qualified majority, you might have a big problem. So maybe we need to think about inventing some mechanism by which we don't let these countries deviate so badly from rule of law, democracy and liberalism in the first place. One instrument would be to go directly and support citizens, media, civil society, and make sure that we have allies for Europe inside the societies, a part of the official relationship that is now between the national capitals and Brussels. And I think on this it has to be a much stronger effort. There are a few matters that we explore deeper in the report, which I think are going to be very interesting for us as well. So there has always been a discussion inside Europe. To what extent is it a loose association? Well, a loose association of EU member states or a federal state? Now, the tendency is actually probably because we are also facing some different threats than we have faced before, is to go a little bit towards some more centralization. And it shouldn't be, the European Union might have itself a little bit more responsibilities. There might be a little bit of shift between the roles of the European Union, the national governments and the local governments for some of the policies that are to be envisaged. And it might not be inconceivable that we are going to have some European taxes in the next 15 years. So far, there have been some attempts, at least at harmonizing some taxation. Of course, national member states are jealous of letting a part of the sovereign right to tax to the European Union, but considering the types of investments that we are going to have to make, for example, in decarbonization, in the circular economy, or defense, there might be stronger voices to support some sort of common taxation. Sorin mentioned a little bit before this discussion about how are budgets going to be in Europe. And there is a discussion about, and some signals are already given in the midterm review of the current budgetary cycle, at least in the collaboration with the Western Balkans, that we are going to focus more on reforms than on projects. So more on the PNRR type of allocating money than on the operational program on projects. This might be a topic for the next cycle, because by conditioning money on reforms, you can keep some of the countries slipping too far away from democracy and rule of law. And we are going to have, but the budgets overall are going to be more limited, because we will have a lot more expenses, whether it's for a common defense policy or higher social spending. All of this will happen on the background on a possible reduction of taxation base. And Sorin was mentioning earlier about the fossil fuel taxes. As I said, and this is my last slide, to give everybody a little bit of hope, Romania risks to remain in the outer circle of EU membership simply because we don't have the ambition and the people places. But we would have incredible opportunities. First of all, we are one of the few countries which are bordering both the Eastern Partnership and the Western Balkans. The EU has traditionally had two different policies, but now, since the wave of expansion is going to include probably countries from both, it will have to have a more unified approach to the entire region. And we are bordering both, and we are very interested to have them both inside the EU, because that would give us also security and interconnectivity to a level that we haven't experienced so far. And we have the interest of engaging in all the possible multilateral platforms like the Eastern Partnership or the Western Balkans with everybody else, or the 3 Seas initiative, to make sure that these countries are firmly anchored on Europeanization. I mentioned earlier about our ambitions or lack of ambitions in the energy sector, but actually one of the possible directions for us to become the energy hub that the government boasts about may be to be involved in the supergrid. Because we might connect with Georgia and the Caspian Sea for renewables. We might have interest also to transport higher levels of offshore wind that are going to be developed in the Black Sea. But at the same time, our network is so congested and it has some problems in making the necessary investments that we might look with hope if there is a pan-European project which might happen before we need to do something. So maybe we would have an interest in pushing for a more federalist version of the European Union. And last but not least, to give a positive spin to this sad story, we have been a model for anti-corruption. And the question is, can we continue to be that in the future? Because all of these countries who are hoping for accession have serious challenges in these areas. So maybe we can show a good model. Yes, and I will stop here.
So just to conclude, I would first ask our partners from RAF if there's something you want to add or to reflect on at the end, and just to stress again that our report, I mean, as somebody very famous said a few years ago, there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and our report is mostly about the known unknowns. So we try to forecast on at least we see the the dimensions, and we try to anticipate what's going to happen. But of course there are the unknown unknowns, and we haven't even ventured into these territories because nobody thought a few years ago that there's going to be war in Europe, hot wars, kinetic war in Europe. Hopefully it will end, but we don't know when and with what results. And it's a very big if. And there are elections in the US later this year, and we don't know the direction of the West in general, because, and I think we have agreement here, because if the West is lost somehow or loses direction, the new member states, Eastern Europe, has no chance, because that was our anchor for good and for bad. I don't see any new member states in the EU being able to, take the lead in terms of basic democracy or keeping the rule of law and the global international order. It's out of question. So these are the unknowns. Hopefully they will not happen, but of course they will. Just to anticipate probably some questions, they are outside the scope of our report. And yeah, with this, I think, and everything we said falls under the assumption that Romania or other states in the region, but Romania has a machinery to put anything in place, you know, or to implement. We can think of strategies, whether this way, migration, energy, whatever. But we assume there's a decision-making level and then an administrative machinery to implement whatever is decided. But as I said, and unfortunately this is least discussed, there is an erosion, a very serious erosion in this machinery with this counter-selection at the political decision level and administrative level at the tops of the government. We are designing now indicators to show that, because you might say, oh, but that's a story or that's political commentary, but we try to devise numerical indicators to show that the situation is worse comparing Romania with Romania of 10 years or 20 years ago. And that's probably an underestimated problem. A country led by functionally literate people, can they implement anything whatsoever? Or take part in this European dialogue that Otilia was speaking about. Let's pause for think. What are we looking for, Stefan? Yeah. Okay, good. So I think it's now the moment to open the discussion with the room, and I suggest we take interventions, also comments, by sets of 3. So let's see who wants to. If there are 3, if not, we can take them one by one. And we have a mobile microphone in the room. No, that's a telephone. Yes, please, Ambassador, here.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm the ambassador of Greece, and I would like to express my appreciation for your presentation. It's very interesting, and you highlighted a lot that is actually in common for many EU countries, including Greece, but very interesting particularities for Romania. There's a lot of challenges ahead, not just for Romania, but for the entire Europe, and you did point that out in your last few points you made. Of course, there are very important challenges that include the security situation around us, and we don't know exactly how it will develop. And that includes Ukraine, but also we see now what is going on in the Middle East. And you mentioned the global risks, or you didn't mention them, but you pointed out that it's impossible to predict right now. With what we have as a known unknown ahead, I fully share most of what you mentioned. I would like to comment, and maybe you can also comment on it, that probably there is a need for increased interconnectivity between countries in the same flank. And I know that for Romania, the Black Sea security is the biggest priority, and the eastern neighborhood at this point, security-wise. But in order to ensure this and enhance the resilience, maybe it's not just an east-west axis or minimal development of north and northeast axis, but definitely north-south, and that includes resilience and security enhancement in many fields. You mentioned redundancy on energy sources. We all face this challenge and this opportunity. Security and mobility, which include for all, for trade and for military. So that was my comment, and maybe you can add your views on this. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. I will let Otilia comment more specifically about energy systems because they're important at the Black Sea and trade routes, but of course we have this renewed sense of emergency in the region that we need the north-south connections for military purposes now and for everything else, but we also have to admit we inherited probably the region, I mean the Balkans, with the worst transportation connections. It still takes 1.5 to get from Bucharest to Sarajevo by train, so nobody would be, that insane to do that. This is nothing new. It's probably a legacy of the Ottoman times, but it has never been overcome, actually. In the communist times, because there was a hub-and-spoke relationship with Soviet Union in a way, by every country, there was not much interest to connect between the small countries, even under the communist umbrella. Greece was brutally separated by the by the political situation back then. And then we didn't do much in the last 30 years to improve the situation. We also have this unsolved Schengen problem. If we look at the big countries, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, there are 2 Schengen borders. And now, and of course, there are a lot of nice lines on the map with colored pens, these 3 C's things which are, and all sort of initiatives. They look very nice on the map, very nice. And we can imagine 10s more, but I'm a bit skeptical looking how projects actually develop, the big cross-country projects, how they, even nation projects, how they are implemented in Romania and Bulgaria, in every country. I'm a bit skeptical about the feasibility of such things. Under big, nice names. We need to do very practical things. Otilia, would you comment on energy at the Black Sea?
Just 1 or 2 thoughts about the EU. Again, I think with the war in Ukraine, we went back to our ideas about enlargement, right? So finally people are looking at the map and they're realizing that if we are to stay together, you have to have the Western Balkans in, not out. It was a simple thing to see many years ago, but of course the political appetite was not there at that point. Now as we're discussing with Ukraine about accession to the European Union, it becomes self-evident that you first have to deal with the Western Balkans. And I see a change in the appetite for enlargement now with Montenegro being the first on the line to move towards the EU. But still the process is very, very convoluted. And I think for many years in Europe, we lived with the illusion that if we're not there, the space is going to stay empty. Whereas there's no such thing as an empty place. You're not there, someone else is going to be there. It's going to be Russia and it's going to be China. They don't have all these elements of rule of law and anti-corruption and reform of institutions and so on. So I think we also need to change the way we think about enlargement. And I think there's a lot to learn from Romania and Bulgaria. And I think we have to abandon the idea that we can have perfection. I think this is what Europe has to learn, if Europe is to exist, that there's no such thing as a perfect enlargement, and that imperfection is actually as good as it gets, and it's better to be in than out, and that you have to find solutions inside the EU to keep the momentum for reforms. So I think that's one of the things that happened in the last, say, 5 years, a wake-up call to reasonability, if we can call it like that.
Just to comment, to respond a little bit to this as well. I've heard voices already raising concerns that if we wait for the EU to reform itself before we consider the accession of Ukraine, Moldova, Montenegro, or whoever, then we are just going to postpone everything. So this is a big risk, and we shouldn't condition somebody else's accession on our doing our homework. Coming back a little bit to the interconnectivity, I think it's absolutely scandalous that we have left big chunks of infrastructure to simply go bankrupt. Like the railways or the energy sector. It's not normal that we are basing ourselves the energy security on power plants which are built in the 60s. We are in 2024. These power plants have been in operation for more than half of the entire period since electricity was being used large scale. So we really need to put some pressures on our politicians. I think this is what we are trying to do also with our reports, because these are major lost opportunities and they are major vulnerabilities. So for example, last year, there was a simple accident on the Giurgiu-Riuse bridge. Some truck simply was put like this on the... And the entire traffic between Romania and Bulgaria was simply completely messed up for half a day. So what happens if we are in a war? It just takes one person to throw a couple of nails on the bridge to block all the transport for hours or maybe days. So we really need to consider things really seriously now, because now we see that war is something that might happen. Oh yes. Yes, now this is a different topic, but we... You know, we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. For example, we are getting rid of Russia from energy supplies, but now there is a big discussion about getting dependent on Azerbaijan in our part of the world. And there are different segments in the European Commission. Some are very concerned about the violations of the human rights, which is something that we strongly believe in, and it's one of the core values of the European Union. And different departments in the European Commission negotiating, extending memoranda for energy. So we really need to put everything together, yes? Or Mr. Scholz was discussing a couple of days ago with China, you know, everybody is trying to, we have in the current budget, in the 21-27, in this midterm review, there was an additional fund for strategic investments to make sure that we don't get dependent on technology from authoritarian regimes. And Mr. Scholz goes and negotiates something with China on the auto industry. So we have to take the challenge seriously.
Let's take another one. One here, two, actually. Good. So.
Hello, my name is Andreea Dugar. I'm from the press, from Great News. And I want to ask you, recently the Parliament adopted the offshore energy law for the Black Sea, and the Energy Ministry announced that by 2032 we will produce the first offshore energy. Do you think this is a lazy goal or not so ambitious? Or do you think that, I don't know, it's too ambitious and not by 2032 we won't get that energy?
Let's take another one and...
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Catalin Gabriel Donner from Experts for Security and Global Affairs Association. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I really want to congratulate you for this incredible report. Even if you underlined at the beginning that the future is dark, I really think that your report presents us a very positive vision of Europe. I'm saying this just because last October, 3 Nordic foreign ministers raised a very important question in Reykjavik, what will happen in the next 20 years with the European Union. I think that in the next 20 years, maybe EU will no longer exist. What will be next? Next this, because I really think that the big theory of integration will disappear, and we need to put a minor theory of integration into light, like neo-medievalism or regionalism, to keep the European Union alive. I don't have a question for you, but I really want to share some thoughts about Romania and its capacity to influence the European policies. And first of all, I'd like to express my skepticism about the European Union Green Deal, because I really don't know if this policy will work. We can see that countries like France, Germany, even the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian one, are skeptics about this policy. The question is, how will work a Green Deal for the European Union, for a very dependent European Union on fossil energy? And the last thought, I think that we Romania, we are trying to build some models of cooperation, and the 3C initiative, it's a good model of regional cooperation. Maybe we can influence the European politics and the European Union vision for the next 20 years, contributing to increase the level of interconnectivity between the regions. We have also Intermarium initiative, but it's not working. Will be very interesting to understand why it's not working. And also, we seen in your presentations that the region, the 3C initiative region, the eastern region, it's not the most undeveloped region in the European Union. So maybe Romania, Poland, Greece, why not, can contribute to the increasing of understand how the interconnectivity can work within the European Union. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'll start first with the first question on offshore wind. Yes, I think, well, first of all, for offshore wind, there will have to be investments going there. That means the investors should have the confidence that these projects would work and that they can transport their electricity to consumers. And for me, the clear signal that Romania is serious about developing offshore energy is when it accelerates the projects which are strengthening the grid, linking Dobroja area with the rest of the country. I mean, we have heard this idea of energy hub forever. So right now, I think either we start working very rapidly, we do what we haven't done in the past 20 years to strengthen the grid, or we push somehow for European supergrids, which is going to be built in Romania and will help us also increase our sale of renewable energy for which we have potential. Now, we have to put this into perspective with the fact that, first of all, there is this project to bring renewable energy from the Caspian Sea through Romania to the rest of Europe. Yes, with this undersea cable. Again, the biggest bottleneck that we have right now on the power grid is between Dobroja and the rest of the country. So we need to fix this, and again, I think it's more likely to do it with a pan-European project than with a project developed by Transelectrica. And one last thing, I think the potential from the Black Sea makes we don't have the same amount of potential that is available in the North Sea. So the Black Sea potential has good perspectives if it's going to be exploited regionally. And Ukraine is the country which has the biggest potential. So it's in our direct interests to make sure that the Black Sea is safe and that Ukraine regains sovereignty over Crimea. On the comments that Cătălin raised, I'm not so concerned about this skepticism on the Green Deal. Because the practice so far has shown that if there is a political will to say something, what is your goal, then you make it work. So it happens. And I'm looking at countries which are, I don't know, we've been saying about the petrostate Norway that we want to copy in the future. Actually, Norway is one of the countries where this drive for complete decarbonization, they are the largest producer of gas, yes, and they have an incredible drive to decarbonize. So if they can do it, why can't France do it? Or Germany, yes? So it's very important to set the goal, and we're going to make it work. And this happened not only in energy, in other fields as well. If we say that we want Ukraine to win, then we make it happen. If we say that we want Ukraine to be inside the European Union, then we make it happen, one way or another.
We started, or maybe we should have started the presentation of our report underlining the assumptions. So we have two big assumptions. One is that the war is not going to become a worldwide war. And the second is that the EU is going to be around for the next years to come, right? So these are our assumptions. And really, if I look at what goes on now in Ukraine with the war and everything, I think there's a silver lining in this thunderstorm for Europe, for the EU. I think it's very, probable that you worry yourself about what ifs in peaceful times. You can afford to fantasize about what ifs, right? But when you have a crisis at your borders, I think you start understanding the value of sticking together. And to me, the big sign that we are waking up from this dreamy state where we're fantasizing about what ifs is the change that happens in relation to the Western Balkans. And I've been advocating for accession for the Western Balkans for many years now. And, I've seen many smiles and nice words and no action. And now I see action even beyond the rules of the game, so to say, yeah? The standards, the pathways, the timing of certain measures. And that is a good indication of Europe waking up and realizing that you don't have the luxury of thinking of maybe you're better alone. Nobody's better alone when you have a war at the border and when you have a big country that is threatening the EU right now. So that's the silver lining in a very pessimistic and sad situation. But this is how change happens also in big entities like the EU. So I do see a shift towards a more realistic approach to life, let's say. We can't be imagining all the fantastic scenarios. We need to focus on what is probable and useful for us. Yeah? It's a very selfish also approach, and it's healthy to also think in, what is in the benefit of Europe, and accept and acknowledge that sometimes things that you haven't done because of internal politics may actually be the ones that you need to be doing because it's in your best interest.
Along these lines, I confirm what Laura said, that probably what's going to be after the European Union, if it collapses in 20 years, I would shift this discussion to a workshop of creating writings. So it's really, I mean, there's no way to forecast about these things, but you can fantasize about them. Indeed, there's a trend actually, and the realization that it is Europe is important. And as a proof of that, now in this round of European elections, there's less discussion than in the last one of Frexit, Roexit. There are not so exits anymore. Also because, I mean, people realize that even in the case of Brexit, what kind of mess it was for the country involved, and it's a, as they put it now, it's a forever project, because Brexit never ends. It's a process of perpetual negotiations of a relationship with the EU. Do you want to get into that? If you don't have administrative capacity of UK, not even Hungary, so they change the tack. All these sovereignist parties in Romania and everywhere, even in Germany, so it's not like we want to get out, but we want to get to Brussels to change it from inside. Which is a nice line, you know, and it gives up hope. Second, and the second point about all these formats and the, you know, spaghetti soup that of formats and cooperation system that Otilia put on the map. Some are real and work, and they have their function, and it's a good idea to use them. But I think we have much more than that. So we have a lot of, you know, unicorns running around us, and they exist, intermarium regions. A few years ago with Otilia, we were evaluating the strategy of the Danube region, which you also saw on the map, one of the big four, with 12 or 14 countries and 2 German lands and going, and with Odessa Oblast as well, and the Republic of Moldova. My feeling is that these unicorns proliferate because there's a huge demand from the media for visuals. So they need to put something on the screen in the evening news, and these are maps or lines on the map. So how nice it would be to have a highway from Constanța to whatever to Gdansk, and a fast railway, and yeah, because and it's nice. Journalists need these things, so people, you know, need to supply such plans. But how real they are, how realistic they are, where are actually the resources for that? Where is the action? Let's stick to, I mean, we are analysts, so we analyze what it exists in reality. And these projects that just produce conferences and plans on paper, it's fine. I mean, if everything will be put in practice, we will all be better off. So I'm not against, they are necessary. But I think there will be more than the capacity and resources to execute them. So only some of them will be executed. It's a bit like, you know, media platforms in Romania. There are much more platforms than people to write on them, actually. So everybody's chasing writers. Can you give me a text for that? And my feeling is that such an effect also in European formats. You know, everybody's inventing formats, but then filling them with content, and especially money, is going to be a big challenge. There was a hand up there. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Pavel Usvatov, Rule of Law Program of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And just one comment and one question. One comment on what Katalin said regarding the Green Deal, and also on Otilia's answer to that, because you mentioned that in Germany, France, they might manage, like Norway as a comparison. Coming from Germany, I'm not that positive thinking about it, because it's just a different situation. We have huge industries in Germany, but also France and, for example, Italy and some other countries that are not existing in many other countries in the European Union. And last year, Germany actually did very well regarding the decarbonization. Our CO2 levels are as low as they have never been before. The reason is not the growth of the green energy. The reason is deindustrialization. And if the industrialization continues in Germany and in France and everywhere else, we can forget about any type of green deals, because there will just be no funds for that. And Germany is not able to work just relying on the green energy at the moment. Maybe the situation will change in 20 years, but we'll see if there will be at all any industry left there, and will not have moved to China or some other countries. So it's a bit complicated situation. The question is to you at the panel. Well, I'm far away of being Marxist, but there's one thing that has been proven from his theory that has been proven wrong and right at the same time. It's that the economy is the basis, the substructure, and the politics is a superstructure. So it felt wrong, because when the superstructures tried to influence the economy, like in the plant economy, it failed. On the other hand, we, in our Western countries, we developed our policies actually on the basis of the economic development, and also took into account the economic development shaping the policies. Now, I see, or this is the question, do you see a shift from that approach towards politics trying to influence, to shape the economy, and kind of losing touch with the economy and doing something else? So it's not the economy that much maybe anymore shaping the politics, the political decisions, but maybe some political decisions taken in order to shape the economy, which actually turns around the whole theory and also the practice from the last decades. What's your view on that, specifically regarding Romania, but also European Union?
I'll start with a quick observation, and I'll pass it to Ottilia to comment at length about economic structure and the Green Deal. Romania is actually a very good example to prove Marx is wrong. On the slide that I put there, you saw that there was an arbitrary decision at the political level in 2015, actually, to start, reverse completely the economic course and the finances of the country without reason whatsoever. There was no reason, just a political decision to do it this way, and it was implemented. We live with the consequences. There was no demand, from the economic forces or the means of production, it came from the superstructure, and it created a reality in the economy, and we live with it. So I don't see a better example that Marxism is wrong, actually, and that ideas matter sometimes much more than the productive forces. Ottilia, how do you see this?
Yes, actually, both points that you raise are actually discussed in the report. Because, for example, on the industrialization, we say that it's going to be a tension between the current approach, which is mostly laissez-faire on some issues, and the imperative of friendshoring, nearshoring some industries, and not chasing away industries which are going to move to other countries where the climate ambitions are lower, and then what you achieve. You don't achieve either climate improvement or economic growth. So these are covered. I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion on reforming the state aid in future years, because we need to think through, and this is again a matter of, unfortunately, of central planning, what kind of industries we want to keep inside the EU, on which If they are controlled by a hostile power, we might have big geopolitical risks. And to what extent we should rethink the state aid policy for that. So yes, we have a little bit of discussion about this in the report. On the politics, on the economic structure and politics superstructure, actually, I totally agree with you. And we also discuss in the energy chapter this subject. So, for example, one of my biggest concerns last year was the fact that there was a discussion about completely reshuffling the market design for electricity, because we saw that the market doesn't work, and we need to make sure that the energy doesn't go after the marginal pricing like every other market in this world functions. Fortunately, reason prevailed, and adjustments to the market design were only minor. Why is it important? Because indeed, we don't know. So right now we have only the technologies that we know could contribute to full decarbonization. What we don't know is which one of these is better in economic terms. And for this to be revealed, we need to have a functioning market in the first place to let all these projects compete with each other, and the best one wins, the worst one fail. And that's precisely what we need to make sure, that we don't block too much funds from now on a certain path, but we leave all the options open until we discover what works. And yes, apart from that, where the market is our queen, we need to have some provisions for redundancy, because we saw that, for example, in case of I mean, even if you have a European grid, you would need, if something happens with it, a cyber attack or a big bomb or a war, then we need to have cities continuing to function, even disconnected from this big grid. So that means a lot of redundancy, and that might mean that some of this redundancy, if it's composed of small power plants, which are going to sit idle, they can be on hard oil, heavy oil, whatever. You don't need to make them fit the big taxonomy. So it's a much more complicated discussion, and we bring some of these aspects in the report. And one last point, I'm quite concerned about the amounts of money and of efforts which are being put now, without knowing whether this is going to work or not, into hydrogen. So are we sure that the best way to use that electricity from Northern Europe is going to be on hydrogen, when we don't know what is going to be the cost and the infrastructure to transport it to where it's needed? And we don't know what exactly is going to be the use for it. Are we going to use it for the current consumption, or are there going to be clusters of industries which are based on that? So these are the types of very costly decisions that we need not to make right now, but to leave the options in policy for the market to sift through a little bit.
Yes, there is another one there. Are there more questions or comments after that? We are not pressing anyone. We are not pressed for time, but I want to make sure nobody leaves with a very burning question in mind. So, yeah, we will be the last to close the lights, so you can stay with us as long as you want. Yes, please.
Okay, so thank you. Congratulations, first of all. I have two questions. My first question is, how do you evaluate the prospect of expanding the Eurozone in relation to the growing sense of urgency in expanding the European Union itself, first of all? And my second question is, what percentage of the Romanian politicians or politicians wannabes who seek to be elected as Euro MPs would read your report and actually understand it. Thank you.
I will start with the second question. We are building now the indicator and we'll give you the number soon. Really, I'm serious about it. How many of them really read things and understand them? That's a big question for decision makers, especially in a country like Romania. And then we will be able to put numbers on all these discussions, you know, that they never take seriously because, this is, you know... what was the first? The Eurozone. We haven't even touched on that because the prospect is increasingly remote for Romania with these twin deficits, actually. There's no way, I mean, it would be suicide to join the Eurozone before you reform that. And not only that we don't see any determination to reform, but we don't even have a discussion about them in the relevant circles, on TV or whatever. People just don't care, and probably most of them don't even know that we are actually on Titanic, you know, heading for the iceberg. Bulgaria will join soon, probably 1 or 2 years. We have to see because there's a bit of instability in Bulgaria as well. But they are much better prepared because they have this, you know, stable currency and much better aggregates. As you saw on my chart, if you were here, they are way better. We were better prepared 5-6 years ago. We were okay for that, but we didn't take the decision. Now, judging in perspective, in retrospect, I think it is better that we are not members because it would be very difficult to manage the system now with these imbalances and the irresponsibility. Actually, we are flying blind. That's my feeling, and this is what worries me, that the small little secret is that there's nobody at the controls. And we're just flying, you know, on a course. And if there's no disruption, probably we can fly a little bit longer. But that's a feeling.
Yes, in the chapter on EU, there is this discussion about opt-outs. EU member states which decide to not participate in certain policies. Eurozone is the typical opt-out which we have experienced so far. The question is, should these types of areas be left like a choice, or should we be pushed to join the Eurozone? Because I think our experience so far has been that we haven't made any serious reform until we were pushed from outside. And the reason why we can afford in the first place these types of deficits is because we are not pushed and we haven't committed. I think for the past 10 years, we haven't discussed publicly, there wasn't any official to say we are going to join the Eurozone by this and that time. So maybe it's good if you have a deadline imposed to fix your finances and your imbalances.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have a framework, a strict framework. If it doesn't kill you, which is a possibility, then you are fine. And you are better off, actually. But if it kills you, then we have to see how to pick it up from, it's post-Europe or something like that. And we move to the creative writers, what happens after that. Some other intervention? Please.
Just a few words. I wanted to say that I'm looking forward every year to the Expert Forum annual report because it's a great opportunity to take the pulse of what has happened, to see what challenges are out there lurking for our societies and economies. And I think I have a question for all of you in the panel in the sense that do you see one singular topic in terms of macroeconomics, what Sorin has talked about, in terms of immigration, what Laura has talked about, or in terms of energy, that is more important than the others in the sense that it has the capacity to solve and to help unblock more other issues and prepare us better so that we fare better off and are better prepared in case of crises that may come that we have thought about and that we have not thought about. That's the question for all of you. And then an extra question for Otilia. I fully agree and share the view that we need to build redundancy. I'm glad to see that we are finally starting to learn lessons from the attacks on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. I liked the discussion about the supergrid versus the localized generation, but my question, and the question I guess, is how much supergrid and how much localized or distributed energy generation. But I guess that the answer will be provided also by the availability of money, funding. So funding will drive the answer and how that will look in reality, but I wonder how you see this.
Okay, let me start with migration, and I'll keep it brief. My 2 cents is that the way you find solutions to deal with the kids of the migrants is going to determine whether migration is going to be a positive story or a future challenge for the countries. So I think the earlier we start thinking about language courses, education, remedial mechanisms to bring kids to where the nationals are, and health access, including basic health, but also more complicated and more costly procedures. The earlier you start thinking about these things and start designing mechanisms inside the country, the better off you're going to be. And I think these are exactly the types of things that we don't discuss. We are just labeling and hoping that, as Sorin was explaining, they come, they do the work, and then they go back home, as if we live in a bubble and we don't see what happens in other countries that have more experience with migration than Romania has. I think it would be helpful to stop thinking outside the box and start looking at what worked inside the box. What are the old school boring solutions that others invested in and paid off in time.
Okay, so first of all, in order for us to write this report, we had to take a big step back from any kind of details. Because our temptation was to look at the details, case studies and this and sectors and to take a big step back. And now you're saying that we should take a bigger step back and to see a final driving line through all of this. If I were to pick one, I would say the critical thing is to have competent, highly qualified people in the right positions. This is valid for all of these topics, and not clientele or securiști or whatever, but people who are really selected by competence and who are there to do their job. Yes. So it's a non-starter. But if I have to name one thing which we need for all of them and which is essential if we are to succeed in any of this, it's about people. Then you asked about what is the right mix of supergrid versus decentralized. First of all, nobody knows, and that's I was trying to figure out to what extent this would be interconnectable in the first place. Yes, and yes, there is a possibility to interconnect such systems. And they are going to require a lot of data management and artificial intelligence, and there is a lot of work to be done and research to be done on how these things are going to happen. What I'm saying is that we don't know yet, with the technologies that we have, which one is going to be more efficient. And the main goal right now is to make sure that we do not foreclose the option for either of them. This is something that is going to come up from when we know exactly which of the technologies. Is it hydrogen more expensive or the supergrid? What would be the alternatives in real life? Yes. There are, of course, and we discussed there in the report, a lot of other difficulties and barriers for any of these situations. So, for example, nobody likes to build new grids because, you know, permitting and everything. Well, for example, to my surprise, Supergrid has the advantage that it is much more efficient with direct current if you bury the cables, and you can simply bury the cables alongside roads which are public domain, and you don't have a permitting problem, yes? So all these things have to be taken into account to see exactly what is the perfect mix. The point is not to put now huge amounts of money into a technology that you don't know it's going to be there, the best one. We had that experience with the carbon storage. Yes, some technologies turn out not to be the most economic ones, and if you allocate too much money right now, it's going to be a big inefficiency.
Yeah, just to draw the line under all these discussions, I think the biggest hope, and it's still more than 50% probable, that we will stay within a framework which makes decisions and the quality of local elites irrelevant, as it was the case in the last 3 decades, and not just for Romania. So imperfectly we will move forward, and the big risk is to end up with this in the situation of, which was illustrated by the case of Portugal, where you know, sands accumulate very slowly, not through extraordinary events, but very slowly from different directions into the wheels, you know, and they just slow down, and you have we have non-convergence. This is still a perspective which I think it's more than 50% possible in the case of Romania. So nothing spectacular is good or bad. And we have to fight and keep it, you know, keep the discussion going. And I take your suggestion, and we will make the yearly report of EFOR even more. We will call it the State of the Nation, and make sure it comes in January, you know, to give a perspective for the year. And I want to highlight again that this report this year has a partner, and the partner is the Romanian American Foundation, and this report is meant to feed into their strategization and hopefully the process, and to be helpful from now on. So yeah, there will be follow-ups. There will be follow-ups, and we want to split it down and continue to discuss it, you know, chapter by chapter in next weeks and months. And I think it's a good time now to actually draw the final line under our events. Thank you all, officials, media, friends, people from the think tank community, donors, and everyone. And be in touch with EFOR events and the website and whatever we publish, because we'll keep it interesting. Am I forgetting something? Oh yes, scan the QR codes, especially the second one that leads you to the page of donations. Thank you.